Hey guys, Solomon with iCode Stuff here, bringing you back another video. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to work with Laravel and Stripe to create a marketplace. I did a video on this last year, I believe. It was a 6-part tutorial series, and it was just a bit convoluted, and I feel like I can do a better job now today. Plus, Stripe did update their API, and so I just felt it'd be a perfect time to showcase what's new. So in today's video, I'm just going to be showing you how to create a very simple marketplace. So I have a page, it's a seller page, or simulating a seller page. And on the seller page, you can see the balance. You can view your Stripe account as a seller. You can see if you're connected or you're not connected. See the name, avatar, and then you can also see, or you can also make a test purchase using the Stripe Elements API, and so that's what we're going to be building today. So yeah, let's get to it. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is create a new Laravel project. Laravel new, we'll call it Marketplace. Let that build. All right, so it looks like that just finished. So we're going to open up PHP Storm. I have it open in my other window, but I'm gonna open up this tab. Where are we at? Projects, Marketplace, open, can do new window. Let's drag that over here. All right, and as always, let's update our preferences. Make that 17 as always. And let's update our editor to actually be 17 too. Font, here we are, update. Cool. So it looks like we got a fresh install. Looks like we're just indexing the project so far, but yeah, if we expand it, we see we have a fresh Laravel install. We're going to use Valet in this video. Last video, I don't think we used a server like Homestead or Valet. We just use regular PHP Artisan Serve. We're going to interact with the database here, so I just felt, hey, let's use Valet. So to link a Valet project, we can just click Valet link in whatever directory you're in. Might ask for your password. All right, and let's use HTTPS. So let that restart. And while that's going, let's check if we can see it in the browser. So let's do HTTPS marketplace .test. All right, so we got a fresh Laravel install. We got the welcome page going. So the next thing we're going to want to do is create the database. So let's just hop into MySQL, root -p. All right. Let's create database. We'll call this just marketplace. Exit. Clear. Let's check out the env. Make that HTTPS marketplace root. All right, cool. So it looks like we got basically everything set up. So we're gonna use Tailwind for this project. As you saw with the preview of this. It looks pretty familiar if you're a Tailwind developer. So let's use the Tailwind CSS preset provided to you by, is it Michael Dorinda, I believe? So Tailwind CSS preset. Dang it. Tailwind CSS preset. Let's see if we can spell this time. All right, let that load. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is built by Michael Dorinda. Just really quick and easy way of getting started with Laravel and Tailwind. So we'll paste that into here. And while that's going, we can copy the next line, which is going to be PHP Artisan UI Tailwind CSS. Okay. All right, and then let's just do an npm install and npm run dev to compile our assets. And so next thing we're going to do is install Stripe, the PHP client, if you guys are familiar with that. So let's head over to Stripe PHP library. So if you check GitHub. You've probably used this before, I'm guessing, if you use Stripe and PHP. So we'll just require that, paste that into our terminal. Oh, everything's still loading, so I will give that a moment to finish installing. So that looks like that just finished installing. So next thing we want to do is install the Stripe PHP client. And while it's going, we are going to want to add some env vals. So we'll do Stripe publishable and Stripe secret. And then you can use the services file for your config. I like to just create a separate Stripe file. I have this nice template that I can add to get as a gist maybe. And so let me paste that from one of my other code bases. Paste that into here. Oop. If it'll let me copy it. Alright, so if we look at this, we just have the Stripe publishable key, Stripe secret, and we just have a description of what these two config or values are. And so next thing we want to do is, since the Stripe client has installed, we're going to want to create a singleton in our AppServiceProvider. So if we head over to the AppServiceProvider, we just need to bind. So if you guys are familiar, you know, you probably use, what is it, Stripe, /Stripe, and then you would set the API key like this. To prevent having to do that every time we want to make an API call, we can just bind our Stripe client to a custom client using the container. And so if we do app singleton, because we're only going to be we only need to load this once, it's not multiple instances of it. So we'll do Stripe client class, and the next thing we want to do here is we want to pass in a closure, and we'll say return new Stripe client, and we'll pass in our config value or our Stripe secret. One thing I should probably do is enable the Laravel plugin. I really wish PHP Storm would automatically do it. I don't know why it doesn't do it. It's kind of annoying. You would assume it just knows it's a Laravel project, but whatever. Apply. Alright. So we'll do Stripe secret. Autocomplete's working and looks good. So we can do PHP Artisan Tinker. Make sure everything is set properly. So we can do app make Stripe client. Oh, I should probably use the full class name. Class might be really small on the terminal, so I haven't figured that out. API key cannot be empty. Oh, that makes sense because we didn't actually add in the values for our API. I'm going to do that on a separate screen. I just don't want to refresh my API keys, even though they're test keys. I just don't feel like doing that if somebody does use them. So I'm just going to paste that in on the side over here. Env Stripe secret paste. All right. And you can grab your Stripe API keys if you click the developers API keys in the Stripe dashboard. So that's where you can grab your keys, and you can just reveal your test key and then paste these two values into your env. But continuing on, let's try it again. We might have to do a PHP Artisan config clear. I'm sorry again if this is really small on your screen. PHP Artisan Tinker. Let's do our same thing again. Alright, so that looks like it's creating a new client properly. So we can head over to the next thing, which is updating our user migration and user model to add an avatar and add in a Stripe Connect ID, as well as checking if your onboarding is complete as well. And so what we can do is go to our database, migrations, users, beneath email, we can just say table string avatar, table string Stripe connect ID. That can be nullable, and then we have to have one more value. We'll give this a Boolean val, and this is just called completed Stripe onboarding, because you can have a Stripe connect ID, but sometimes you might not finish onboarding, and so we just need to distinguish between the two. So that's what we're doing here, and we can give this a default of false. All right, and so next thing we want to do is update our user model with those vals. So we can just do avatar Stripe connect ID, and we can say completed Stripe onboarding. I believe that's what it was. Yep, completed Stripe onboarding, and then we can cast this to a Boolean val down here using eloquent cast. So we just say bool. Cool. So that looks like that is set up. One thing we're going to want to update is the factory. So if we head over to database, factories, user factory, I have this little custom method of generating random avatar URLs from the random user.me API. And so if we look at this, what's going on here, it's just it's grabbing your gender, so if it's a man or a woman, and then it's adding a number between 1 or 99, since that's the limit of the random user API. And so that's just how I'm generating a random avatar. So yeah, so we got the factory updated, user model updated, and migration updated. So we're going to have to add one more migration, but we're not going to need a model for this. So we'll just say PHP artisan make migration, create Stripe tokens table. So when you are, or Stripe state tokens. So when you are creating a Connect account, you get linked to Stripe, and then they pass in a session ID for your application as a way to identify that Stripe session belongs to the user of your application. So typically you can pass in the Laravel session ID as the session for Stripe. However, I'm just gonna make it easy here. So I'm just gonna create a random string value, add it to the database, and then add in the user ID as well, so that we can basically link the two sessions together. Might be confusing the way I just said it. However, we'll get into actually visualizing it and building it out. So let's do that. All right, let's head over to our migrations, create Stripe tokens. All right. I believe it's string value. We'll say token. And then we also have a foreign ID to our user. And I meant to say, so I'm going to be using the term user and seller as if they were the same thing. So they're basically synonymous in this video. So if you see me using the user model, just know that belongs to the seller. That's just a quick tidbit or update I just wanted to give you. But foreign ID, we'll call this seller ID, and it is constrained to our users table. Okay. So I believe we're good to go. I think so. Let's do a PHP artisan migrate, and let's see if everything works properly. Cross our fingers. Cool. Looks like it's working properly. So the next thing we want to do is create a test user, or our first seller, I guess. So what we can do is user new, or let's do ×1. This is just using the Laravel factory. So user ×1 create. Remember, use create, not make. Make will just create a it'll make the actual model, but it won't add it to the database. So if I open up our database to the side over here, let me figure out where to grab it at. Okay, I'm gonna have to update these vals. So I'm just opening up SQL Pro. I just have to input my database values on this other screen. So root, secret, and marketplace. Connect. All right. Let's drag that over here. So if you guys can still see, we have our marketplace, we got our users, and we have our test user in our database. So that looks good. Let's drag that back over here. Go back to our code. Cool. So we got everything set up from a database perspective. So the next thing we have to do is add the actual logic so that we can, have this same exact screen. First thing we can do is create a blade file. We'll call it the seller.blade file. So if we go to resources, views, seller.blade, and so we can copy some of these vals over here, paste that in, body, cool. Next thing we want to do is just create the actual layout. So we'll call this main, give it a class of BG gray 50, add some padding to the screen. Let's create a container for the screen as well. I'm just assuming you guys have experience with Tailwind CSS. This video isn't really emphasizing actually building out the layout. It's just emphasizing the actual Stripe Connect logic. So I'm going to be moving pretty fast when it comes to the actual view part of it, the blade part of things. So cool. And then let's create a max width of 5 Excel. Make that MX auto as well. Cool. All right. 1 second. So what I'm going to do, instead of just building this all out, I'm just going to copy a code snippet I have of the blade file, and then I will chat about the actual structure and what it looks like. So let me copy that over from this other screen, I believe. Let's turn off our timer. Okay. So yeah. All right, so let's paste this in. So what's happening here is we're just building out the actual profile component. So if we look at this, it's just this part. It's not the actual Stripe form. So what we need to do is add in the seller's avatar. We have their name, and we're checking if they've completed their Stripe onboarding process. So if they haven't, it's going to say not connected, and then please connect your Stripe account. Let's do that. Okay. And then if it is connected, it's just going to say connected, and it's going to give you your balance, which is going to be 0 for this video because Stripe doesn't have like the instant payout, or it doesn't instantly reflect in your account balance. So but when we click to view our Stripe account after we receive a transfer, we will see that we do have money in there, or a pending balance. So and the next thing we have is the actual button to redirect to Stripe. So if you've already created an account, you can view your Stripe account, and if you haven't created your Stripe account or completed the onboarding process, it's going to say connect Stripe account. And so the actual view part of it is set up. The next thing we want to do is create a controller. We will come back to this file later to add in the Stripe form, but we will just do that later. So make controller, seller controller, and I'm going to use some dependency injection. If you guys are familiar with that, dependency injection is just passing in services or dependency files through the constructor and the container. So The first thing we want to pass in is our Stripe client, or let's initialize it. I'm going to be using PHP 7.4, so let's go to our composer JSON file, make this 7.4. Cool. All right, and let's import this class, and then we want to have the database manager as well, since we don't have a model for the Stripe state tokens table. All right, so using PHP Storm, you can do a command N if you're on a Mac, or Control N if you're on Windows, I believe, and then you can click the constructor, and then it'll automatically pass in these values for you. And so if you guys are familiar with the container, or if you guys are familiar with the Laravel container and dependency injection, it's just passing in the Stripe client and database manager as dependencies. So the first method we're going to want to create is the show profile method. Show profile, and we're just going to pass in an ID. All right. First thing we want to do is grab our seller, first seller, or using the user model again, which is user find, pass in our ID. If the seller is null, we will just throw a 404 screen, so we can say abort 404. All right. And so the next thing we can do is return the actual view, the seller view, and we're going to pass in two variables. So it's going to be seller and then balance, but we're just going to pass in a null balance for right now. Cool. So let's go to our web file. Let's remove this route get. One thing we got to do is go to our route service provider, actually uncomment the namespace to make this active. Cool. We'll call this seller, pass an ID, seller controller, let's show profile, name, we'll call it seller.profile. And so if we head over to our application, I will close this for right now. We'll come back to that later. But it's going to marketplace test seller ID of 1. All right. So it looks like something with our blade file is broken. Oh, so it looks like we have a link to a route that's not yet added. So we will change this to just be the £sign for right now. Refresh our page, see if we got it going. All right, cool. So it looks like we have our actual profile set up, or the profile component set up. So since we don't have our Stripe account connected, it's going to say connect Stripe account, or please connect your Stripe account in place of balance. And then lastly, it says not connected. So it's pretty hard to miss that your account isn't connected to Stripe. Next thing we want to do is add in the balance, or not the balance logic, but add in the redirect ability. So if we create a method, we'll call this public function redirect to Stripe. It's basically going to look the same as this pass method. We're just going to copy these two right here. All right. And then the next thing we want to do is let's check if our user hasn't completed our onboarding process. So we'll say check complete. What is that? I forgot. Completed Stripe onboarding process. My bad. Brain fart. All right. Next thing is let's generate a random token, because we're going to add this to our Stripe state tokens table. So let's generate a random string. We'll say random, and using the database manager, we can use the table Stripe state tokens, and we can insert our values. So we are using the database manager. So if we want to update our timestamps, we have to do it like this. Updated at use now. And then for our seller ID, it's just going to be our seller. And then for our token, it's just going to be the random token that we generated. And so this is how we're tying the two together. So when Stripe passes back that random token we generated, we know it belongs to this user or seller. So that's what's going on here. Yeah, what's next? Next thing we have to check is add in some logic if they even have an account ID. So let's check if they have a Stripe Connect ID. And if they don't, what we're going to want to do is create that for them. So if is null, we'll say if the Stripe Connect ID is null, let's create the actual account for them. So what we can do is account is equal to the Stripe client, use the Stripe client variable, we'll say accounts, we'll say create, and then country is going to be US or whatever country you're in. Not currency, type is going to be using the Express account. So make sure your Express accounts are supported in your country. I know they've expanded a lot to a lot of countries so far. I think in last year's video there's only 3 or 4 countries, so yeah. So check on Stripe if your country's available. And then the next thing we want to do is use the email, seller email. All right, and so now we have our account. So let's update our seller, and let's add in that Stripe Connect ID for them. Account, pass an ID, and let's refresh our model. Or fresh. Cool. And so that's just checking if we have our account. So we still have to set up our account, or we still have to complete the onboarding process. And so that's going to look a bit different. So let's create a variable called onboard link. And let's use our Stripe client again. And let's use the account link service. And we're going to create. And so what we got to do is pass in the account. And so this is just going to create a URL for them to set up their onboarding or complete the onboarding process for Stripe. So we can do seller, use the new Stripe Connect ID that we just created over here. Let's pass in our refresh URL. Make that null for right now. Pass in our return URL. We will make that null for right now as well. And then the type is going to be account onboarding. Onboarding. All right. So I think we have almost everything set up. So last thing we want to do is redirect to Stripe with that new link. So onboard link is going to be an account link object, so we can access the URL property. All right. And so what this is doing now is if the user hasn't completed the onboarding process, it will make them go through the Stripe onboarding process and redirect them to the Stripe page. However, the next thing we got to do or account for is, or first before we account for the next thing, let's check for if the user already has a Stripe account. And if they do, we'll just use a login link the same way, but we don't have to pass in the extra parameters. And so this is only if you've completed the onboarding process so far. We'll say use the account service, and then we'll say create login link, and then we will pass in the seller's onboarding ID. And as I said, we're only doing this if they completed the onboarding process. So return, redirect, login link, it's going to be the same object type, and so we can access the URL property. All right, so that looks like we're set there. So this is actually redirecting to Stripe. The next thing we have to do now is account for when Stripe redirects us back to our page. And so we can create a function called save Stripe account. And it's just going to pass in that token that we gave it from earlier. And so what we can do is Stripe token is equal to the database manager, use the table Stripe state tokens. And in a real application, these tokens would probably last for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes. So don't use mine as a carbon copy for your application. You know, add in some extra security because this is just for an example. So yeah, so token equals token, and we can get the first one. So let's break this out so it's not overflowing the screen. And so as the same thing above, let's just check if this is null. We're going to return a 404, basically saying this is not right. So 404. If it's not null, what we can do is grab the seller, and we are using a foreign ID, so we don't have to check if the seller exists. So we can just do seller is equal to user find Stripe, not Stripe token, Stripe token seller ID. But you can add in extra conditions to check if the user is null, but I just don't see a point here because we're already using a foreign ID from our migration. So yeah, and so what we can do now is update the completed Stripe onboarding to true. And then what we can do is redirect back to our show profile, right? Or seller profile route. ID, seller ID. All right. So we got to add these to our web file. So what we can do is just route get, we'll say Stripe ID. And so this is just going to redirect us to Stripe. So seller controller let's grab the redirect to Stripe name, redirect Stripe. Next thing we want to do is account for the page when Stripe redirects them back to our page. We'll call this connect, and this is actually connecting their Stripe account. So we'll say save Stripe account, and we'll say save.stripe. All right, and so what we can do is we have to go back to our where is it at? What am I looking for? Not show profile. Oh yeah, we're going back to our onboarding link, so we have to add in those routes that we just used. So we'll say what we want to do is add in the Stripe refresh URL, which is just going to be the redirect to Stripe. We can use the ID, seller ID, and then next up is the actual token, or not the token, but the return URL. That's the URL that Stripe is going to redirect them back to. So we'll say save Stripe, and it should pass in the token that we had generated, right? So that's how it's tying the two together. And so, yeah, I believe we should be good to go. So if we go back to our blade file and we undo what we did earlier, so this is just redirecting to Stripe when they click this button, and then it's just linking that ID to the seller ID. So if we head back over, let's see if anything broke. I don't believe so. So if we click this, it should redirect us to Stripe. If it doesn't, we'll figure out why. Save Stripe, connect URI. So let's investigate this. Save Stripe. Oh, that's my fault. So if we go back to web, this is token, not ID. Refresh. All right, so it looks like it redirected us back to Stripe. And so we go through this onboarding process. We can just give in a random email. We'll just say next, use a test code. We'll just say we're an individual. Use my name, use a test website. All right. And then we can use a test account, and it should redirect us back to that URL that we had when we click the submit button. So let's cross our fingers. Let's hope it's working properly. Cool. So it looks like we are connected, and we have this screen saying connected now. We're going to have to add in our balance in a second, but now we can view our Stripe account instead of connect Stripe account. So if we go back to our seller controller, what we can do here, I believe, is utilize the, what is it called? The balance service, I think. So balance, Stripe client, balance, retrieve. So first parameter is going to be null, and then we're just going to pass in our option over here. We'll say Stripe account is the connect account that we're using. Water reminder. Stripe connect ID, and then we can grab the available amount. This is going to pass in an array. If you look at the Stripe docs, it'd show you the balance object, so it's going to be an array in the available section, and then we can grab in the amount. But what we got to check for is if the seller has already completed the onboarding process. So let's do, if they've completed the onboarding process, let's apply this tertiary, is it tertiary or ternary operator? Something like that. Though operator with a question mark, just remember that. Completed Stripe onboarding. That's not right. I keep forgetting the name for some reason. Add in our question mark, and then let's add in a null value if it does not exist. And then what we can do is pass in our balance over here. So if we refresh the page, let's see if anything broke. All right, so we got $0. So next thing we got to add is a payment form with Stripe elements, just purchasing or simulating purchasing a product. So I've been using a code pen for this. So I'll add this to the description. So there's just this little code pen. I might need to update it with my own, because I think it's missing this method called Stripe token handler that I have in mind. So I will create a code pen, link it in the description so that you guys can access it. So yeah, I'm gonna copy and paste what I have from this other screen. So the first thing we got to do is add Stripe as a script in our blade file. So if we go up here, add Stripe. Next thing we can do is add our actual form beneath our profile. So if we go scroll, here we are. I believe, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I will remove this for a second. So if we go back to our page and we refresh, it might look ugly right now because we haven't added in, it won't even work because we haven't added in the actual Stripe JS logic. So next thing we have to do is create a script tag at the bottom, and I will go over the script. So let's close some of these. So script. So what we're doing here is if we scroll up, this is just the default which Stripe provides you on the website. So we're initializing our Stripe object, initializing the elements, applying the styles, and then mounting our card element. And then what's next? Oh yeah, then we're grabbing our form, and then on submit, what we're doing is creating a token, checking if there's an error with the token. If not, we're then going to the Stripe token handler, which is updating the form. And so this is what we have here. Then it's inputting or setting a hidden value called Stripe token with our Stripe token that we just generated, and that's passing it to the backend when we click form.submit. And so it should be going to, I believe, the purchase route, and we haven't created the purchase route quite yet. And so let's do that. Let's create our purchase route. Let's create our purchase route. So let's create a method. We'll just say purchase. And so this is simulating purchasing a product from a seller's profile. And so let's start out with a request. And as I said, we're going to want to validate our Stripe token. We'll just say this is required. Give it a string. All right. Next up, we're going to want to do what we did similar to the other methods. Check if the seller exists. I'm sure there's a more convenient method. I'm not using the Laravel IDE helper, so just a bit tougher to predict which methods are available. But all in all, it's going to work the same way. So yeah, we've added the condition to check if the seller is there, and then if they have not completed their onboarding process, completed Stripe onboarding, if I can spell, we will return back, and we'll return back with an error, with errors. I think we have our errors set up here. If not, I can add them a little bit. Yeah, so we just want to display an error if there actually is an error, or if their account isn't set up. So please finish onboarding process. So this is kind of simulating a real application. You don't want to purchase from a seller's page if they don't have a method to get paid. So that's what this is doing here. But if they do, what we can do is a try catch block, and we're going to try to charge them. So use the Stripe client. Let's use charges, and let's create a charge. If you're in Europe, or usually I guess other parts of the world other than the US or Canada, you might want to use the payment intents API, because that's the more recommended way. I think it has like the SEA regulation. So if you're in the US, you can go ahead and use charges. If not, try to use the payment intent. But continuing on, so we're just going to simulate we're purchasing a product for $20. Stripe uses cents, so we'll add in 2,000 instead of 20. Currency is going to be the US dollar for me. The source is going to be that Stripe token that we just generated, and then description is going to be this is an example charge, and then for a catch block, it's going to throw the API error exception. So what we can do is catch API error exception, and then abort, use 500, and then what we can say is pass in the exception message. There's no need to add return here. I'm just doing it so the IDE doesn't complain when I get to the next step. So I'll add some comments saying let's purchase a product, and then if we go down here, next thing we want to do is actually transfer funds to the seller of the product. And so what we have to do is another try catch block, Use Stripe client. We'll use transfers, create, and what we can do is pass in the amount. So the seller is going to keep 80% of the sales in our application. So we'll use $16 instead of $20. Currency, same thing, US dollar for me. Source transaction is going to be the charge that we just created. So it's going to be charge ID, and the destination is going to be the seller's Stripe account. So Stripe Connect ID. All right. And what we can do is catch API error exception, and then do the same thing up here. Cool. And so now we can just return back. I'm not going to pass in any success messages, just no need at the moment. And then next thing we have to do is go to our routes file. We'll say purchase, is it purchase or charge? We'll say charge, seller ID, pass in seller controller at purchase, and then we'll say name complete purchase. All right, and so if we go back to our blade file, let's add in our form action route, let's say complete purchase ID, and then ID is going to be the seller's ID. So seller ID, or not, yeah, that should be good, I believe. So if we go back to our application, maybe inspect real quick, ensure everything's working properly, refresh. All right, so it looks like we're missing a required parameter. Where is this at? Complete purchase. And so what does it not like? Oh, I named it ID instead of seller ID for our, so let's call this seller underscore ID. Make sure our route is the same. All right, cool. Refresh. All right, so we have our Stripe card. Let's add in some styles actually. So I have the styles in this other file, and this is going to be in that code pen as well. So let's add it to the top of the page. And so this is just styling the element. Let's refresh. All right, so it's added in the background. I don't know why that's like that. Oh, that's if you already have cards and you're trying to autocomplete for you, it might show a black background. I believe you can just refresh the page and it'll go away. Yeah. And then next thing I have to do, I kind of forgot to add in the errors at the top of the page. So if there are any errors, we can add it here. And so this is just showing an alert, a little card panel, just saying, hey, you have some errors. So let's head back over here. Just refresh one more time. All right, and we can use 424242 as our test card, and when we click submit payment, it says not found. So why is that? Charge. 1 second, we will investigate that. I figured it out. Typically when you're using a Laravel application, you'll pass in the IDs like this or any URL parameters, and just pass in the request as the second parameter. But you can also utilize the seller ID. You can also access any URL parameters that you have in the request body, I believe. So if we refresh, same process, 424242, submit payment. Alright, so that looks like it went through, I believe. There's no success message. So what we can do is head over to our Stripe account as a seller. So let's click view Stripe account, and it should be $16 after we just completed that purchase, I believe. So, yep, so we're at $16 and our Stripe account is connected and we can view it. So I believe that's really everything here. I will upload the code pen so that you guys can access the Stripe layout, the Stripe form, I guess. But yeah, outside of that, we were able to set up our page to be almost identical to that Stripe marketplace. So if we bring that over here, they look almost identical. Only thing is the balance doesn't update right away because the balance is pending, I believe. So yeah, so it's showing me what I will be receiving soon. So that's the reason why it didn't show right away. But yeah, this is just a very simple tutorial on creating a Stripe marketplace or Stripe seller page and integrating it with Laravel and Stripe Connect. So you guys take care, and I'll see you in the next video.